In this week's lesson, we'll be painting bricks. The first step is to draw the bricks on watercolor paper. There's a line drawing in Blackboard for your reference. Make sure that you ink in each brick so it looks like this. We'll go from this to this. The colors we'll be using for this project are lamp black, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, orange yellow, scarlet, yellow mid, and white. We will begin by using 3 colors. We'll start with scarlet red, then some orange yellow, some burnt umber, and we'll add a little bit of scarlet red. Now you'll mix these colors together by adding a little bit of water to it, just to thin it out a little bit. Do the same with all the colors, add water, and make sure you wash your brush in between. Now we'll begin by laying in some texture with each color and adding a little bit of water just to blend it all together. It's important not to overblend. We definitely want to see each color. Here I'm using a toothbrush and I'm taking the paint and I'm flicking it on the surface just to give it a little more texture. You could also use a brush for this. It's really important to allow each step to completely dry before moving on to the next step. Now we're going to mix the mortar color, or the cement that's in between the bricks. We'll use some white, some lamp black, and some burnt umber. Using your brush, mix these 3 colors together really well. Here I just added a little more white, just to lighten it up a little bit. Add some water, so it's got a thin consistency. Use the scrap piece of paper just to test out your lines, and then begin to draw or paint the lines in between. You'll want to experiment with the amount of water you put into the paint. Again, you don't want it too thick, but you also don't want it too thin or transparent. Use a very small brush for this, and take your time. Go in and do the horizontals and the verticals. Round the corners of a few bricks as you paint to give it a little more character. And again, it's important to take your time. Now I'll just go back in, round some more corners, and clean it up. Now we're going to mix a highlight color. To do this, we'll use orange yellow, some white, and some yellow mid. Again, use your brush to mix all these colors together. And I've added a little more white to lighten it up. Make sure you put some water in it, just to thin it down a little bit. It's important to determine your light source. Here, it's coming from the top right. Think of each brick like a protruding panel. The top of the brick would get a highlight, and the right side of the brick would get a highlight, the side facing the light source. Now highlight each brick and vary the thickness of the highlight just to give it some character. Now I'm just going back and I'm touching up a few bricks and thickening up some of the lines. Alright, let's mix the low light color. To do this, I'm using burnt umber, scarlet red from the base, and some ultramarine blue. Using your brush, mix these colors together really well and add some water, just to give it a thinner consistency. Now with the light source in mind, we're going to low light each brick. That would be the bottom and on the left. You'll need to experiment with the amount of water you put into the paint. You want it thin enough so that it goes on easily, but not too thin as to appear translucent. Now we're going to add some cast shadows of each brick onto the mortar. Make sure you cast the shadow on the low light side of the brick, away from the light source. To mix the shadow, take the low light color and add water until it's translucent. Casting shadows is a subtle difference, but an important one, to give each brick depth. Now I'll take that same shadow wash and paint a few bricks to darken them, just to give visual interest. Then I'll take the shadow wash and I'll paint uneven surfaces to give it texture on a few bricks. Now I'll use a toothbrush and the shadow wash and I'll flick shadow wash onto the surface. This will give texture to the overall painting and especially in the highlights. It'll also give it a sense of age. Don't be afraid to add a lot of texture to the surface. Now I'll just take some black paint and paint around, just to give it a little more presentation and to clean up the edges. Make sure you just add little indentations where the mortar is. Once the painting has completely dried, an optional stage is to go back in with some colored pencils. Here I'm using some yellow and some orange and some black and white, just to give it more texture. And that's it. You're done.